Hello everybody, welcome to Corn on the Quad. Today I'm going to run you through my first ever quadcopter build. This is the EMAX Nighthawk 200. Okay, I bought this about 6-7 weeks ago now, and yeah, this is it. This is my first ever build. Learned everything from scratch from YouTube, no prior experience of building a quadcopter. Here it is. Now this video I'll just run you through. I'll take the lid off and stuff, take the frame, the top part of the frame off so you can see inside. I'll just run you through how I built it, okay? If you actually want to watch a tutorial or a very good video of how to build the EMAX Nighthawk, I'd recommend that you watch Zoe Fpv's video of her build, because that video is what helped me build this basically. I watched that thing about 20-30 times in certain bits just to get an idea of what was going on, because she's really good at explaining some of the more basic concepts to a beginner. Okay, so lovely, here we go, let's get into it. Okay guys, so here we are. This is the EMAX Nighthawk 200. I've taken the top part of the frame off so we can see a bit better what's actually going on here. Okay, so I bought this as a kit. Cost me £100 from RC Geeks, and it's to be honest, I didn't know anything about frame sizes really or anything, and I read somewhere, I can't remember where it was, that this was meant to be a good beginner build. So I thought, whatever, we'll give it a go, okay, and just crack on. Now with the kit you get the frame, you get it's a lovely carbon fibre frame. It's a 200 size frame, so it fits. This fits 5-inch props. Okay, it's very tight. Let me start by saying that for a beginner, especially, it was quite challenging, but very rewarding, as you'll find out. The kit comes with the frame, PDB, the EMAX Skyline 32 flight controller, and the Nano 20 amp ESCs, the MT2204 2300 kV motors, some props, and some other bits and bats that you get with it. So first things first, what I did was, obviously the frame itself is one piece. All you have to do is put these standoffs on. So I screwed the standoffs on first here, so frames all together, and then I mounted the motors onto the arms. Not screwed them on, just placed them in just to measure up, because as I say, it's a very tight build here, and you can see that the ESCs here are very tight onto the arms of the quad. Very tight indeed. There's not a lot of space. Literally, it buffs up against the pegs here, the standoffs, and it's right up to the motor. Okay, so that was a first challenge of how tight it was. So motors were on. Got the ESCs out, cut back the heat shrink on there, and desoldered the 3 motor wires that are on the ESC, because you don't need them. Because what I was doing was following Zoe FPV's video, is directly soldering the motor wires from the motor straight onto the ESC there for a better connection, save space. Cut the heat shrink back on the motor wires here, because literally I can't show you because it's all heat shrinked up, but the wires coming out of here I had to cut down till about here. Very small indeed. It was very fiddly. It was probably one of the most challenging things on the build itself right at the beginning. And for a beginner, I had to learn to solder again. I haven't soldered since school. Soldered these straight onto the ESC, very tight indeed. But they were on there nice, and that was so satisfying when it was on. Heat shrinked it all back up again. Cable tied it to the arm for a bit of rigidity and extra support. There's actually some really nice notches you can't see in here, in the arms, where a cable tie fits really snugly. So ESCs connected to the motors, strapped to the frame. You end up having wires everywhere, because you'll have the ground and the positive coming out of the ESCs here, along with the signal wire and all the gubbins that go with that. So literally it's all hanging about everywhere. Okay, and it can look a bit of a mess. But once the ESCs and the motors are attached, screw the motors down into the arms, and then you're set pretty much for the motors and the ESCs. They're all in place, and once those are in place, then you can focus on your PDB and measuring all the wire lengths out and what's going to fit nicely. Okay, so I've just unscrewed the flight controller here to give you a quick look at the PDB underneath, okay, and run you through that and what it looks like, because this was one of the more challenging aspects of the build as well. Part of the challenge, actually, I know it sounds ridiculous, was mounting these standoffs, because I'd read about, you know, you need to put insulation tape or electrical tape underneath the distribution board, because you don't want it sitting right on the carbon fibre, because it'll short out because it's conductive. So I put some bloody electrical tape on, and also some like double-sided tape, just to give it a bit of extra room. But then when trying to put these standoffs here, to mount these standoffs, they barely fit underneath the frame, through the frame. So literally they were popping out a tiny amount. Screwed the little nuts on, and that's holding it in. But that was quite a bit of a ball ache, if I'm honest. And also a little word of advice, because there's electrical tape under here, when you're soldering, you've got to be careful, because especially on the other ports here, the 12 and the 5 volt here, which I'll get onto later, the electrical tape was melting and coming through the frigging holes. So, you know, it was mixing in with my solder joint, which I wasn't too happy about, but it was all fine. It all worked out in the end. Anyway, PDB. As a beginner, I found it very tight. It's a mess here, you know. It's a mess of wires, but this is what it's like when you're building a quadcopter. Okay, it all makes sense. So you've got on this EMAX one PDB, you've got, you know, positive, negative, blah blah blah, alternate like that. It's quite tight. Like I said, for a beginner, I haven't soldered since school, so it was quite a tight little area to solder these wires in, because you cannot have these wires overlapping or touching, because they run alternate like that. They'll short the thing out. Okay, so it's you've got to be really careful and concentrate as to what's going on when you're doing this. So you got your red, you got your live and your ground coming from your ESCs here, and literally you measure them up, bing bang bosh, and you solder them onto the corresponding pads. Same with the ESCs on the front arms there. Okay, it's very simple, very straightforward. It's just tight and fiddly. You got to be careful, and you got to measure it out, and just take your time. It took me a couple of days to do this, because I just took my time. I did a couple and then went off and did something else, because you just want to be concentrated. You don't want to rush this kind of thing. Okay, so once you've got the ESCs onto the PDB, you want to start thinking about your power. So if you look in the middle here, the middle two pads, the slightly thicker gauge wire there is actually running to our battery XT60 here. Okay, so get some of these off Amazon or whatever, and you solder that on there, because that's what your battery is going to get plugged into. Okay, pretty straightforward. All this was soldered whilst the board was mounted. Okay, so I had the board mounted into place, because you want to measure all this out, make sure the ESC wires are all the correct length. Also on this EMAX PDB, there's a section here for the 5 volt for the LED, a little switch there for the LED, and also on the other side here you can see you've got a 12 volt and a 5 volt. You can just see it amongst all the wires. Back output there. Come on to that later, but that's basically for you. Sorry, I'm shaking there. That's for your to power the flight controller and the VTX camera transmitter. Okay, so we've got our PDB mounted. We've got our ESCs running to the PDB, hooked up all nicely. We've got our XT60 battery cable hooked up to the PDB. So everything's powered up. Think of it, the quad, like this is my thing, like, you can take this for, and you can use it if you want. The quad, the frame is like the body, the PDB is like the heart, giving the power, and then the flight controller is the brain. Okay, that controls everything. You like that? That's nice. That's corn on the quad, that for you. A little bit of biology, a little bit of quad building, nice. Okay, so the flight controller. If you're building a Nighthawk 200 at the moment and you're looking at this, you're thinking, Christ almighty, that looks nothing like my flight controller. That's because it isn't the Skyline 32 that comes with the kit. Long story short, I knew nothing about flight controllers or anything, so I had to go and talk to my friends at Radio C, close by. It's a drone and quadcopter shop, and they told me basically that the Skyline 32 that comes with the EMAX isn't that great. You know, it's an F1 board. What does F1 mean? basically old school technology. Okay, so look into the boards F1 to F4. Okay, we're running F4 boards at the moment. Basically this hobby is moving so fast and so quick that the technology is moving just as quickly, so you've got to keep up. This here is a F3 X Racer F303 flight controller. Okay, basically this board uses Betaflight. It comes with the hex flashed onto it. That sounded really technical, didn't it? And I barely know what it means. Basically it means it's flashed with it's got Betaflight flashed onto it. Okay, which is the program I use to manipulate and program my flight controller for the quad. Okay, there's Clean Flight, there's Race Flight, is it? Whatever. There's a few different programs. Pick one that you're going to use and stick with it. I like Betaflight. The power comes from the PDB and it comes onto this board here. All these little inputs here are for your ESCs. Okay, so the signal wire from your ESCs run from the ESC, and what I did was, you can, because of the tightness of the build, you can't use pins to connect them. That's something else, I won't get into that. But so the way you got to connect your ESCs to the flight controller is by stripping the wire on the ESC, tinning them, and then pushing them through and soldering them to this board here. And you've got the motor outputs here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you put the signal wire, run them from the ESC, put through here all 4 signal wires for all 4 motors, ESC sorry, going here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you take the ground, which is the brown that you can see in the background here, that comes through and that goes on the ground pad there, obviously, which is the outside. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice and simple. Because we're building a quadcopter and nothing larger, these rows here are left empty, and then the 5 volts that comes from the PDB goes on here. But notice it's soldered here, there's no signal wire obviously with this, so it just goes on the ground and live here. Whilst we're here and looking at the flight control, I'll just mention some other things that are on here that might help you out. A necessity, an essential item that you must get that I didn't get until after my first flight, and it nearly ended in disaster, is a buzzer. I totally underestimated having a buzzer. I built this to fly line of sight the other week because I didn't feel confident putting the Fpv Gear on. I was also quite impatient, took it out into the field, long story short, went tits up, and I lost it in the long grass for about 20 minutes. I thought I'd lost my quadcopter, my pride and joy, after 2 minutes. So basically, I bought a buzzer, very cheap buzzer, which is here, and this little thing just runs, and I've just, on the X Racer here, there's actually a pad to solder this on. I don't know if you can see it there, but anyway, it's not, you just strip the wire like we did with the ESCs, and you're just going to solder that onto here. Look, there's actually a little designated pad, buzzer, ground and live. Bang that on there, set it up with your transmitter, with your radio, and honestly, it is a life-saving piece of kit. You need it, especially if you're flying line of sight, or even if you obviously we're flying FPV now. We've got to be careful, because if you lose that in long grass, it'll save your ass. Right, also on here, there's these things called UARTs or UART ports, and they're basically just ports for outputs and banging stuff in. It's another thing that I had to learn as we went along. Down the rail here we've got 2 UART ports, one here, and that consists of ground, 5 volts, transmitter, RX2, receiver 2, and these are the receiver 1, transmitter 1. Quite confusing, don't worry about it too much. On here there's an S-bus output, input, and that is your UART1. Is it? Yeah, I think it's UART1, 2, 3. Josh Bardwell's got a little diagram on it, which is really helpful. Basically, these are for your receiver, for your radio that you need to set up. Okay, so I'm not going to get into it too much, but basically this is the cable for the receiver for my radio. So that that is hooked into here, and that is soldered in underneath here. It's quite hard to see because it's a bit of a mess of wires underneath, but basically the way it's set up in Betaflight is the receiver signal wire is going to RX2 on the UART number 2.3 port. For Christ's sake, I'm confused now myself. Anyway, the signal wire has to be on a separate UART to the ground and 5V, okay? Because to do with the serial on Betaflight, this is all confusing. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but it needs to be on a separate thing because it can't do two. It needs to be on a separate line because it can't do two things at once. So just copy what I did. Look, put the receiver on RX2, the ground and 5V on the other thing, and you'll have no problems because it's set up for iBus, not S-Bus. Blah 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 blah. Okay, so I'll just screw the flight controller back onto the frame now. Okay, a lot of people talk about using thread locker or Loctite on the bits and bats, on the screws and nuts on your frame, and by all means you can. I did that when I first started building it. Actually, the first time I put these various screws and things in, especially down here on the frame, and I wouldn't recommend it because you make errors and you crash and you smash things about so much that you're always unscrewing things. So I wouldn't bother if I were you. Now, so we've got our flight controller all hooked up to the PDB, so we're getting power to the flight controller. We've got our lead here, which comes with our receiver. We've got that hooked up to the flight controller as well. Now, we need our receiver, which is here. I've got a FlySky FSI6X, and that comes with this lovely little receiver here, the X6B, 6XB, whatever it's called. I've wrapped it in electrical tape, heat shrink, and I've strapped it to the underneath of my top part of my frame, which goes on the front of the quad like this. Because it's such a tight build, there's no other place I could see for it to go, so I just popped it under there. I was quite proud of myself actually, it's my own little idea. Cable tied that on, and the antenna come through these little gaps here, which is nice. I haven't got a GoPro or anything on the front, so I just bang them through there. These are actually some replacement ones because the ones that came with it I chopped off in the props the other day, which wasn't very helpful, so I had to buy some more off eBay and put them on there. Okay, you got your lead here, plug it in, that's it, bosh. Because it's getting the 5V off the flight control, that powers the receiver. You won't be able to, your radio won't be able to talk to the quad if your battery isn't plugged in. Okay, so if you've got your quad hooked up to your computer via the USB, the flight controller will work. It'll have a little light on it, and you'll think, oh, brilliant. But your radio won't talk to it because it needs power from the battery. Okay, so we've got our receiver hooked up. Lovely, nice. Next thing to talk about is the Fpv Gear. This just recently went on the other week, so I was flying it line of sight until I smashed it to bits. And to be honest with you, flying at FPV is so much easier than line of sight. Line of sight is hardcore, especially if you start turning it, because you've got to start thinking in all different kinds of dimensions. I know it sounds daft, but it's quite difficult to orientate yourself quickly, especially if something goes wrong and it starts speeding off in a certain direction. To be able to reorientate yourself quickly, input the quad and get it back stable, chances are it's going to crash. Okay, and that's what happened to me numerous times. So FPV Gear, okay, it's quite straightforward, but it's a bit tricky. Okay, so I've got the Runcam Swift Mini here on the front. It's a lovely little camera that I picked up. I did a bit of research on it. This comes with its own little frames, a couple of them, and let me zoom in so you can get a bit of a better look here. The EMAX comes with these little carbon fibre frames that go either side. However, this won't fit in here with those on, so I drilled 2 holes into the bottom of the frame. Be careful, carbon fibre, don't breathe that shit in. And drilled the holes in, banged the frame on, screwed it on myself, and then put the camera onto that, so it's lovely and sturdy. So the camera here, there's a lead. That lead comes to here, and it's underneath here because on the back here we have our VTX, our video transmitter. Connect the antenna on. Always have your antenna on. Always, always, always. Just in case you power it up with your antenna on, bad things will happen. So always have your antenna on, okay? Never ever plug your battery in without your antenna on. The cable from here, from the video transmitter, splits off, okay? And the power and the ground from the video transmitter is connected to the PDB. Remember we had the 12 volt out on the PDB. Well, that is where this is soldered into. So we're getting our power from the PDB to the video transmitter, okay? Now how do we get the power from the video transmitter to the camera? The lead that comes with the Runcam Mini Swift needs to be stripped, tinned, and then soldered to the signal, ground and live wire from the VTX. Now that might seem a bit messy, but unbelievably that's how it's done. There's no little connector plug or some nice little neat way. You literally have to strip the wires on here, strip the wires on here, and solder them together and heat shrink them together. I know it is a bit messy, but that's the way you got to do it, and that's hidden under here just to keep it a bit neater. Alright, but that's how you get your power. Again, obviously you need your battery hooked up to see anything through your VTX. Okay, so that's our VTX, and that is just, I've just taped that to here and heat shrinked it again and taped it to the back of the frame where there's space. And that's pretty much it, guys. A couple of things to mention whilst I'm screwing the frame back together is with this build, even though I love it, I love this little EMAX Nighthawk. I mean, it's like having your first car in it. You're always going to remember it, even if it's not as, you know, it's not as swanky as some of the other quads you see online and stuff, and people flying about. It's a lovely little thing, and you'll always have a special little place in your heart. But there are a couple of things that I found challenging with it. The ESCs, okay. When you're learning about quadcopters, the motors need to spin in a certain direction, inwards. They need to spin clockwise and anti-clockwise, okay. When you're setting that up in beta flight or clean flight, you quickly determine that one, two or more of your motors will be spinning in the wrong direction. Now, in order to fix this, you can hook the quad up to BL Heli Suites, okay, and do it like that, or configure it. I've got a Mac, and there's this thing called BL Heli Configurator, so get that, okay, because that's brilliant. Well, I say it's brilliant, I haven't used it because these ESCs won't work with it. They won't work with BL Heli, which is unbelievable. Long story short, I had to, two of the motors were spinning the wrong way, so I had to come all the way back, snip off the cable tie, strip back the heat shrink, and then desolder the already tiny tight wires and reverse them. So I took the outer two wires and then crossed them over and did the same here, and that basically means that you've manually altered the direction of the motor. But it was a ball ache, but I just sat down one afternoon and just did it, okay. I just got on with it and did it. On my next build, I'm making sure that the ESCs are definitely compatible with BL Heli, because that'll save a lot of time and a lot of effort. Okay, look at that, the frames back on together, wonderful. Another thing, the battery straps that come with the EMAX are massive. They're far too long, and you wrap them round and you've got bits of battery strap hanging out that get caught and get sliced up by the props. So I bought myself some from the guys at Radio C, radioc.co.uk, and these things are nothing, pennies, and they're a lot shorter. They're rubberized as well, so they grip, and yeah, get some shorter straps because you don't want them going into your props. Yeah, so that's pretty much done. All we need to do now is put our props on. The EMAX does come with some props, but I obliterated them after about 20 seconds of my first flight, so I got some more. You go through props like anything, so get as many as you can. 5-inch props, remember, so it's very tight here. Don't have anything hanging out, otherwise you will be cutting it off with your prop. And that goes with the XT60 cable and the battery connector. Okay, so make sure that's all tucked in. I have it strapped to the top of the battery when it's there, because on a battery my prop did go through the wire there and it was a nightmare. Okay, a simple little rule to remember when putting your props on, is which direction to put them on, is on the motors, the arrow, if it's pointing this way, there is writing on top of the prop. You'll see here a little engraved writing. Just make sure that is facing the way that it's spinning. So the top of the writing's here and we're spinning this way, so just put it on and there we go. You can't go wrong. So there we have it. There is my Nighthawk 200 build, my first quad I've built. Yeah, I love it. Lovely little design and beginner quad, I think. Can be challenging in parts, but you learn so much from building this thing. So give it a go. I highly recommend it. Yeah, see you next time.